When American and Soviet troops began tracking Nazi leaders to bring them to trial at Nuremberg, they often found only the wives. Husbands were either dead or had fled. A fierce debate followed. What should be done with these frightened women? Were they witnesses? Innocent bystanders, accomplices, or perpetrators? All claimed innocence, playing the roles of devoted housewives who cared for children and husbands. In a few cases, that was true. For most, the reality was far more sinister. These were among the vilest and most unrepentant women in history, the Nazi princesses who loved German war criminals. They were tied to the party, often long before meeting their spouses, and in most cases outlived them, keeping the flame of anti-Semitism and racialism alive. Learn what tragic fates awaited these wives, mothers, and mistresses after their beloved Third Reich lost World War II. Welcome to the Marshall Memoirs. Gerda Bormann, the devil's devoted wife. Not every wife of a Nazi leader was herself a Nazi. Gerda Bormann was absolutely devoted to Hitler's ideology and party, arguably the first Nazi princess. Born in 1909 in Constance to a family of party enthusiasts, she was introduced to Uncle Adolf by her father, Walter Buch. If anything, Gerda was even more fanatical than her father, something that became clear after she fell for a stocky, thick-necked man named Martin Bormann, a relative latecomer who joined the party in February 1927. He served briefly as a local press officer before moving into the SA, the party's paramilitary wing, where he first crossed paths with Gerda's father. Gerda fell madly in love. The two married in 1929. When Hitler took power in 1933, Bormann became Rudolf Hess's chief of staff and later Hitler's personal secretary, the peak of his career. Gerda could not be prouder, and she embraced the life upgrades that came with such a high position while caring for 9 children in line with the Nazi ideal. The Soviet invasion ended her dream. As the Red Army closed in on Berlin in 1945, Gerda fled with her 9 children. She exploited the chaos, posing as the director of a children's home. 4 of her children disguised as orphans. The other 5 were taken by Martin to facilitate the escape. Seeing no way out, he took his own life, biting into a cyanide capsule. His body would not be found until much later, so investigators did not know his fate. Gerda boarded a school bus with the children and crossed into Italy, stopping in South Tyrol, where the Nazi regional boss had secured a hiding place for her sensitive materials and a home in a small valley village about 30 miles from Bolzano. Safe for the moment, she was in agony. Her sister-in-law, who had made the journey with her, noted that the usually quiet Gerda could not stop complaining about a lower body pain. Settled in Bolzano, they found an Italian doctor who immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition, advanced ovarian cancer requiring urgent surgery. By then, the Allies were on her trail. 2 intelligence agents tracked her down and alerted the British unit in the area. After consulting the doctor, a British army major arrived at her door. Gerda panicked, thinking she would be taken to a concentration camp, but the major assured her she was in no danger. Instead, she was sent to a prisoners of war hospital in Merano. Surgery was performed, but without effect. Facing imminent death, Gerda sought solace in religion and converted to Catholicism. She died on March 23, 1946, a few months shy of her 37th birthday. Mein Kampf's avid reader, Magda Goebbels. On May 1, 1945, Magda Goebbels might have envied Gerda Bormann's chance to flee. She would never learn what became of Gerda. Johanna Maria Magdalena Ritschl was born in 1901, spent most of her childhood in Brussels, and was repatriated to Germany when World War I broke out. In 1921, she married a wealthy industrialist, Günther Quandt, twice her age. In 1929, when he discovered she had been unfaithful, he ended the marriage, leaving her a small fortune and a luxurious Berlin flat. Berlin at that time was seething with daily clashes between Nazis and opponents. Urged by friends, Magda attended a large Nazi rally where Joseph Goebbels was the main speaker. Other than Hitler, Goebbels was the party's most electrifying voice, bristling with aggression, extremely intelligent and highly educated, with a PhD in literature from Heidelberg. Small, with a club foot and pronounced limp, he nonetheless wielded a hypnotic voice and incendiary ideas. Magda was captivated. She joined the party immediately and bought copies of Mein Kampf and Alfred Rosenberg's The Myth of the 20th Century, a rambling ideological mishmash. Magda quickly became leader of the local Nazi women's group, but her presence sparked friction. Many resented taking orders from such an overprivileged lady. Frustrated, she aimed higher and applied to work in Goebbels's propaganda department, where he couldn't fail to notice her. Struck by her poise and beauty, Goebbels asked her to manage his private archive, hoping proximity would ease seduction. By late February 1931, they were sleeping together. A relationship formed quickly. By April, they were planning a future. Her apartment on Theodor-Heuss-Platz became a key meeting place for Hitler and other top Nazis. That brought trouble. Joseph grew jealous of the attention Hitler paid Magda, and Magda's own infatuation with Hitler did the couple no good. Yet it was also why she married Goebbels, to be closer to the Führer. On December 19, 1931, Goebbels and Magda, already pregnant, married in a civil ceremony followed by a church service. Hitler was best man. When Magda thanked him with a kiss, his eyes filled with tears. On September 1st, 1932, their first daughter, Helga, was born. It was harrowing. Magda emerged exhausted and weak. Her doctor warned that childbirth had aggravated a pre-existing heart condition and that she should be careful. Despite this, and before fully recovered, she became pregnant again and miscarried in December. The couple spent New Year's Eve at Hitler's Obersalzberg home, ill-timed, as Magda had an infection and dangerously high fever. She survived, but from then on remained seriously limited in her movements. During the war, she trained as a Red Cross nurse despite her weak heart and delicate health, which often confined her to bed. When Soviet troops entered Berlin in late April 1945, the Goebbels family moved into a subterranean bunker connected to Hitler's. On the afternoon of April 30th, they met Hitler and Eva Braun for the last time, then shared a final supper in their own bunker. The next day, May 1st, SS dentist Helmut Kuntz was instructed to inject their 6 children with morphine, one by one, to render them unconscious. A cyanide capsule was then slipped into each child's mouth and crushed. When all were dead, Joseph and Magda walked into the Chancellery garden and also took their own lives. Goebbels had ordered an SS officer to shoot their bodies to ensure death, then douse them with gasoline and set them alight. Soviet troops found the charred remains the following day. Philosophy, literature and mass murder, the life of Ilse Prohl. One evening, the young and wealthy Ilse Prohl ran into a neighbor in Munich, a tall young man in a tattered uniform who introduced himself as Rudolf Hess. She was immediately struck by his appearance, thick eyebrows, sunken eyes, a haunted expression, and instantly drawn to him. Whether the 26-year-old Hess felt the same is impossible to say. Of all the senior Nazis, Hess was the most enigmatic. It would become clear he had suffered mental problems since early youth. He was also a decorated war hero, wounded twice in battle. Ilse pursued him, and they began spending time together. They became close friends, the affair purely platonic. Still a virgin, Hess showed no interest in sex for the next few years. Their relationship lacked a physical dimension, which frustrated Ilse. Instead, they cultivated a spiritual connection rooted in their shared love of German culture, especially the romantic writers and composers of the late 18th and early 19th century. Ilse's favorite writer was Friedrich Hölderlin. By the autumn of 1920, Ilse had completed her secondary studies, begun a part-time university course in German and library science, and started work at an antiquarian bookshop. Aside from occasional trips outside Munich to walk the countryside, she spent most of her spare time working for the Nazi movement, delivering leaflets, putting up posters, helping with the party newspaper, and acting as Hess's secretary, while he attached himself to Hitler and put his body on the line during the frequent brawls between Nazi supporters and their left-wing opponents. In recognition of their efforts, Ilse and Hess were granted the privilege of being around Hitler during his free time. Eventually, Hess and Haar became very good friends. In 1923, Hess was one of the loyal soldiers who fought alongside Hitler during the failed beer hall putsch in Munich. Fearing capture, Hess telephoned Ilse to say he would try to cross the border into Austria, which he did. Later, he returned to Germany to visit Ilse, but was captured and imprisoned with Hitler and the other instigators. Ilse never failed to show up every Saturday when Hess was allowed 6 hours of visiting time. Hess valued Ilse's loyalty his whole life. After Hess's imprisonment, Ilse and Rudolf married in 1927, and their only child was born in 1937. By then, Hess had been appointed Reichsminister and spent long hours at work. When the war began in 1939, he grew increasingly paranoid, and his mental health declined until, in 1941, he decided to fly solo to Scotland in hopes of negotiating a peace treaty directly with the British government. The British authorities put him in a POW prison instead, and after hearing the news, Ilse took their son and retreated to the town of Hinterland to get away from Munich, and from Hitler's fury at Rudolf, who was considered a deserter. Rudolf Hess was among the first Nazis prosecuted and sentenced at the Nuremberg trials. On June 3, 1947, Ilse Hess was arrested in Munich. Like other wives of war criminals condemned or executed at Nuremberg, she was transferred to an internment camp in Göttingen. On March 24, 1948, she was released and settled in the Bavarian Alps, where she opened a guest house. In 1955, Rudolf was serving a life sentence in Spandau prison, which he visited on weekends. Ilse had always been a dedicated Nazi. Until her death at age 95, she remained loyal to Hitler and his views, and after the war became a well-respected author. She published a popular book in 1952 and followed it in 1954 with Rudolf Hess, Prisoner of Peace, the first of several collections of her correspondence with her husband. Upon his death in 1995, he asked to be buried next to his husband in Wunedel, Bavaria. Margaret Himmler, the silent collaborator. Margaret Boden met Heinrich Himmler during a 3-hour train journey from Munich to Berlin. They struck up a conversation, and by the end of the ride, a connection had been made. After going their separate ways, they began exchanging letters, an almost daily habit that would continue throughout their relationship, largely because they were more often apart than together. Margaret was 8 years older than Himmler. From a comfortable landowning family, she was just old enough to join the German Red Cross in 1914 and become a nurse. After completing her training, she was deployed to a field hospital. Soon after the war ended, she married Himmler. Their wedding plans depended on Margaret selling her share of property she had inherited and using the money to purchase a plot of land. They were going to become farmers, Himmler's long-cherished ambition, but Hitler had other plans for one of his most loyal associates. Himmler went on to a successful career in the Nazi Party, becoming chief of police, leader of the Waffen-SS, and Minister of the Interior during Hitler's presidency. He was also responsible for overseeing the Jew extermination programs. In May 1945, Himmler and Margaret parted and promised to meet again abroad. Himmler was captured and bit into a cyanide capsule, dying almost instantly. Margaret and their daughter Gudrun left the town of Gumund as Allied troops advanced into the area. After the US Army's invasion of Bolzano, Italy in May 1945, Margaret and Gudrun were arrested. They were held in various internment camps in Italy, France, and Germany. During interrogation, it became clear Margaret was not informed about her husband's official business. Later that year, she was called to testify at the Nuremberg trials, where she also claimed innocence. She and Gudrun were released in November 1946. From internment, they took refuge for a time with the Bethel Institution of Bierfeld. Margaret maintained that while she had been Himmler's wife, she stayed far from the spotlight. Nevertheless, the Allied committee monitoring her actions was convinced she likely supported the goals of the Nazi Party and endorsed her husband's actions. Her lawyer insisted during the appeals process that Margaret could not be responsible for her husband's crimes. Between 1948 and 1953, Margaret faced 3 different trials. The final outcome: a judge decided she would not be held accountable for her husband's crimes, despite her proximity to them. On January 15, 1953, she was classified as a beneficiary of the Nazi regime and sentenced to 30 days punitive work. She also lost her pension rights and the right to vote. Their daughter Gudrun left Bethel in 1952, and from the autumn of 1955 onward, Margaret lived with her sister Lydia in Heapen. Margaret told Lydia she hoped only for a quiet life and was content to disappear into obscurity. That is exactly what she did, and when she died on August 25, 1967, at age 74, she took all her husband's secrets with her, including all his affairs. Sleeping with evil. Edwig Potust. In fact, as Margaret Himmler once confessed to an American interrogator, her husband had never been very faithful. His most famous affair was with his 26-year-old secretary, Hedwig Pott, born on February 6, 1912, to middle-class parents who put her through a high-end secondary school where she learned English. Hedwig subsequently earned a degree at the Economics Institute for Interpreters in Mannheim, graduating in 1932. She landed a job as a clerk in a post office. Bored and seeking a challenge, Hedwig applied for a position with the Gestapo's press department in autumn 1935. That still wasn't enough to satisfy her ambitions, and in January 1936, she became Himmler's personal secretary. Hedwig's friends called her Bunny because she was always friendly and upbeat, two things Margaret Himmler had never been. Hedwig enjoyed gymnastics and rowing and was popular with colleagues. In October 1937, she joined other staff members for Himmler's birthday at Lake Teensee and was welcomed into the SS family. As they worked in close proximity, Hedwig and Himmler's relationship developed, and sometime over Christmas 1938, they admitted their feelings for each other. Himmler discussed the affair directly with Hitler, who was famously averse to marriage, but also to divorce. He recommended Himmler continue the relationship, but secretly. For some reason, Himmler did not do this. Instead, he told his wife in 1941 that he had a mistress and wanted children with her. Margaret was sorely bitter, but nonetheless accepted the fact and continued as Himmler's wife. Hedwig had to resign from her duties in 1941, and the Nazi Party found her a place to live in the Mecklenburg Forest, about an hour north of Berlin. Hedwig and Himmler had two children, a boy and a girl. In 1944, he bought her a cottage near Berchtesgaden, where Hitler's famous Eagle's Nest was located. There, she led a bizarre life. Once, she was visited by Gera Bormann and her children. According to Gerda, after tea, Hedwig invited them all to the attic to see something special, furniture made from human body parts. Hedwig explained in detail the process behind the construction of a chair whose seat was a human pelvis and whose legs were human legs that stood on real human feet. Hedwig also had copies of Mein Kampf bound with human skin that had been peeled off the backs of Dau inmates. Gerda remembered that Himmler tried to give Bormann a similarly unique edition of Mein, but he refused to take it. Gerda said it was too much for him. After World War II, POTUS remarried and lived the rest of her life outside the public eye. In post-war interviews, she refused to answer questions about Himmler's role in Nazi war crimes or about her own knowledge of them. When she learned of Himmler's death on the radio, she went into hiding, living temporarily with Eleanor Pohl in Rosenheim, Upper Bavaria. She was arrested that same year by members of the US Army and interrogated for several days in Munich. She claimed complete innocence and wasn't prosecuted. For the rest of her life, she kept quiet about her involvement with Himmler and stayed away from the press. When Himmler's daughter Gudrun found out about her and about her half-siblings, she tried to make contact, but Hedwig refused. Little is known of her post-war life, apart from the fact that she died on September 22, 1994, aged 82, in the city of Bonn-Baden. Gudrun Himmler, the angel-faced neo-Nazi. The third Himmler girl was Gudrun, Heinrich and Margaret's only child. She was famous among her father's acquaintances because everyone thought she embodied the ideal of the pure German race, with her blonde braided hair and delicate features. As the only child of one of the most prominent families in the Nazi cabinet, she enjoyed a luxurious and happy childhood until the end of the war. As did other Nazi princesses, she and her mother tried to sneak past the southern border into South Tyr. But, as explained before, on May 13, 1945, Margaret and her daughter were discovered in the Tyr and taken into custody by the Allies. They spent 2 nights at an American-run hotel near Balsano, 1 night in Verona, flew to Florence, and ended their journey in a British-run camp and interrogation center near Rome, where they were the only female prisoners. From Rome, she and Gudrun were transported to Nuremberg. On arrival in Nuremberg, Margaret was strip-searched. A vial of potassium cyanide was found stitched into the shoulder padding of her coat. She and Gudrun were placed in a bare cell with 2 planks for beds. Recognizing that the jail was no place for a teenage girl, Colonel Andrus of the US Army tried to keep Gudrun's days as normal as possible. Even so, she was interrogated on September 22, 1945, asked about her final meeting with her father and whether she had traveled much during the war. Disciplined and angel-faced, Gudrun replied that she had spent the last 5 years either at home or at school. She mentioned a brief tour of the Dachau herb plantation. Pressed on whether her parents had discussed post-war plans or anything significant, she insisted they never told her anything at all. The interrogators believed her. After the war, Gudrun married far-right propagandist and author Wolf-Dieter Burwitz, who later became a party official in the Bavarian section of the National Democratic Party, NPD. Now, a bona fide Nazi princess, she openly advocated far-right causes. She found validation within Stille Hilfe, Silent Help, an organization aiding former SS members, working tirelessly on its behalf for more than 40 years and receiving a level of respect that bordered on reverence. At the same time, she helped set up a barely legal neo-Nazi group for her generation called Viking Youth. In 1958, she attended a gathering of SS veterans and fellow travelers in Austria near an ancient Celtic site in the Bohemian forests. Guest of honor at what became an annual celebration of her father's achievements. From 1961 to 1963, she worked under a false name as a secretary for West Germany's intelligence service, BND, then headed by Reinhard Gehlen, who recruited numerous ex-Nazis for their contacts in Eastern Europe and anti-communist experience. Gudrun died in 2018, still clinging to the belief that Himmler had done no wrong. Hedwig Hoss, more than just a housewife. Not much is known about Hedwig, wife of Rudolf Hoss, the commandant of Auschwitz, beyond her reputation for being reserved and quiet. Her life came under renewed scrutiny thanks to Jonathan Glazer's award-winning film The Zone of Interest, which portrays her as a typical German housewife running a large household while her husband worked long hours. Born in 1908 in Neugratz, Germany, she became entangled with one of history's darkest chapters at 21 through marriage to Hoss. The couple had 5 children: Klaus, Annegret, Heidertrude, Ingeborg, and Hans Rudolf, and moved in 1940 to a villa a few kilometers from the camp, a jarring contrast of domesticity beside industrialized murder. How much she knew remains contested. Some argue she was sheltered and blissfully ignorant inside a privileged bubble. Others point to cracks in that facade. Survivors recalled seeing Hedwig on horseback near the camp. Some accounts claim she received furs and jewelry likely looted from victims. Whether she chose not to know or willed herself not to may never be settled. As Allied forces closed in during 1945, Rudolf tried to disappear. Hedwig stayed with the children, calculating that flight would look suspicious and feigning ignorance. She was captured and interrogated by the British, but her testimony revealed little, and she was never charged with any crime. She did not even tell her own children their father had been hanged at Auschwitz. Her daughter Ingeborg later moved to Franco's Spain, worked as a fashion model, then emigrated to the United States, settling in Arlington, Virginia. It was during a visit to Ingeborg that Hedwig died on September 15, 1989. She was buried under an anonymous tombstone that carried a single word: Mutti, German for mommy. Lena Heydrich, Hitler's biggest fan. Where Hedwig Hoss kept her views to herself, other Nazi princesses broadcast them loudly. Among the youths drawn to Hitler in the early 1920s was teenager Lena von Osten, encouraged by her already Nazi brother to attend a party meeting. One was enough. She embraced the movement's appeal to the young and reveled in its rejection of old Prussian politics, alongside a zealous anti-Semitism. From a once wealthy family whose fortune had dwindled during hyperinflation, Lena left her island home on Fehmarn near Denmark to train as a teacher in the port city of Kiel, boarding with other female students. On December 6, 1930, Lena attended a dull student ball, until she met 27-year-old naval officer Reinhard Heydrich. Tall, blonde, athletic, and striking in uniform, he also had an abnormally large head, narrow eyes, a small mouth, and prominent ears. Lena was intrigued and agreed to meet him the next day. Beyond a powerful physical attraction, they shared something else: a fierce determination to escape their pasts and forge their own destinies. On arrival in Nuremberg, Margaret was strip-searched. A vial of potassium cyanide was found stitched into her coat's shoulder padding. She and Gudrun were placed in a bare cell with 2 planks for beds. Colonel Andrus of the US Army tried to give the teenager something like a normal routine, but interrogation came anyway. On September 22, 1945, Gudrun was asked about her final meeting with her father and her wartime movements. Disciplined and angel-faced, she said she'd spent the past 5 years at home or at school. She mentioned a brief tour of the Dachau herb plantation. Pressed on whether her parents ever discussed post-war plans or anything significant, she answered that they told her nothing. The interrogators believed her. After the war, Gudrun married far-right propagandist Wolf-Dieter Berwitz, who later became an NPD official in Bavaria. Embraced as a bona fide Nazi princess, she advocated for far-right causes and found her home in silent help, working for decades on behalf of former SS members and receiving near-reverential treatment. She also helped set up the barely legal Viking youth group. In 1958, she was guest of honor at an SS veterans gathering in Austria that became an annual celebration of her father's achievements. From 1961 to 1963, she worked under a false name as a secretary for the BND, then headed by Reinhard Gehlen, which hired numerous ex-Nazis for their Eastern Europe contacts. Gudrun died in 2018, still insisting her father had done no wrong. Hedwig Hoss, more than just a housewife. Hedwig, wife of Rudolf Hoss, commandant of Auschwitz, was reserved and quiet, yet her life sat beside a crime scene. Born in 1908, she married Hoss Young and bore 5 children: Klaus, Annegret, Heidertrude, Ingeborg, and Hans Rudolf. In 1940, the family moved to a villa a few kilometers from Auschwitz, domestic harmony shadowed by industrial killing. How much she knew remains contested. Some say she was sheltered and blissfully ignorant. Others recall her on horseback near the camp and claim she received gifts of furs and jewelry, likely looted from victims. As 1945 closed in, Rudolf tried to vanish. Hedwig stayed, judging flight suspicious, and feigned ignorance. Captured and interrogated by the British, she revealed little and was never charged. She did not even tell her children that their father had been hanged at Auschwitz. Ingeborg later moved to Franco's Spain, modeled, then emigrated to the United States and settled in Arlington, Virginia. Visiting her there, Hedwig died on September 15, 1989. Her grave bore a single word: Mutti. Lena Heydrich, Hitler's biggest fan. They were stubborn, ambitious, and contemptuous of inferior people. Lina was a fervent Nazi even before meeting Reinhard and complained that her husband hadn't read Mein Kampf. After his discharge from the Navy due to their relationship, she urged him to join the new SS. A meeting with Himmler sealed it. He was hired on the spot to lead SS intelligence. His career soared until his assassination during the occupation of Czechoslovakia. After the war, Lena was interrogated. Despite her open commitment to Nazism, no specific crimes could be pinned on her, and she was cleared. In 1956 and 1959, she sued West Germany and won a substantial pension on the grounds that her husband, a police general killed in action, entitled her to it. Tried in absentia in Czechoslovakia and sentenced to life, she was never extradited. She remarried in 1965. Her second husband died 4 years later. Lena lived until 1985, publishing books and articles defending her late husband. The 2 wives of Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring, alone on this list, married twice. Nazi officers were expected to keep affairs private, and divorce was taboo, but Göring's elite background made him useful to Hitler as a bridge to the military and aristocracy. Introduced in 1922, Göring was less persuaded by ideology than by Hitler's power over crowds. The party offered him a chance to be a big fish in a small pond, sealed by his Swedish wife, Karin, an ardent anti-Semite who worshipped Hitler like a Norse hero. She cemented the bond between the 2 men. Göring became a leading Nazi, founded the Gestapo, and later commanded the Luftwaffe. Propaganda turned Karin and Hermann into a romantic showcase couple, but she was sickly. After her mother's sudden death in September 1931, Karin traveled to Sweden and suffered a fatal heart attack on October 17th, just before her 43rd birthday. Göring carried on, as Karin would have wanted. On tour, he met actress Emmy Sonnemann, the opposite of Karin in everything but beauty. Emmy presented herself as apolitical, happier discussing theatre, books, and art than statecraft. Yet, through Göring and Goebbels' machine, she became the Reich's first lady. After the war, that visibility brought consequences: a 1-year prison sentence, loss of 30% of her assets, and a 5-year stage ban. She later settled quietly in a small Munich flat. Hitler's toxic love, Eva Braun. In 1930, Hitler asked Martin Bormann to secretly investigate the ancestry of a 17-year-old assistant at Heinrich Hoffmann's photo studio, Eva Braun. Hitler wanted to be sure she was Aryan. She was. The complication: his toxic involvement with his half-niece, Geli Raubal. Jealous and controlling, he forbade Geli time alone with any man but himself. On September 18, 1931, while Hitler was in Nuremberg, Geli used the pistol he'd given her and killed herself. Devastated, but now unencumbered, Hitler turned to Eva. He opposed marriage for himself, denying Eva's repeated requests. She seemed to embody his ideal of natural womanhood: blonde, athletic, apolitical, free-spirited, and easy to manipulate. Courteous and indulgent at first, he then withdrew. In 1932, neglected and despairing, Eva shot herself. The bullet lodged in her neck, and a doctor saved her. Whether a plea for attention or a true attempt, it worked. Hitler promised to take better care. He rented and then bought her homes, gave her a car and, most important, adjoining rooms to his at the Berghof. Slowly, within constraints, she came into her own there. As the Soviets closed on Berlin, Hitler, Eva, and the inner circle retreated underground. In a final gesture, he granted Eva her long-coveted wish: marriage. Bormann conducted a brief civil ceremony in the bunker. It changed nothing. The next day, they would be dead. Eva spent the day saying goodbye. News of Mussolini's public execution erased any hope of escape. Hitler sat with her and discussed the end. They made a pact. There was no point in living. It is commonly accepted that Hitler shot himself after witnessing Eva ingest a cyanide capsule. Their bodies were carried outside, doused with gasoline, and burned. The remains were buried in a shallow grave in the Chancellery Garden. Soviet troops later found the charred corpses and secretly took them, fueling decades of rumors that they had escaped. Only in the 1970s did the Soviets acknowledge possession. By then, nothing remained to study. Before the end, Eva wrote her sister Gretel a letter. She said she'd had a happy life and that dying at the Führer's side spared her the horrors to come. She slipped the note into an envelope and gave it to Hannah Reich. Gretel Braun, from stardom to obscurity. In 1944, Himmler protégé Hermann Fegelein, a dashing, sadistic SS cavalry officer, married Gretel Braun. 6 months later, as the Soviets massed at the Reich's borders, Fegelein deserted, planning to flee Berlin with another woman and stolen gold. He was caught and executed, just hours before Hitler and Eva killed themselves. Gretel, part of Hitler's inner circle since 1930, had lived comfortably as a schoolteacher's daughter in a middle-class family. After the war, she faced the hard edge of a fallen regime. Ostracized for her ties, she rebuilt quietly. She bore a daughter, Eva Barbara, named for her sister, worked as a secretary, and remarried in 1958, becoming Gretel Braun Lobinger. In 1971, after Eva Barbara's boyfriend died in a car crash, the young woman took her own life. Gretel died in 1987. Her life, like so many on this list, marked by proximity to monstrous men. The reckoning. Some argue these women were young, merely enjoying luxury near powerful men. That would be deceitful. Most, Gretel and Eva included, were accomplices, often collaborators. They shared the ideology, encouraged atrocities, and sometimes pressed their husbands to go further. After the war, some, like Eva Braun and Magda Goebbels, took their own lives. Others were imprisoned or sanctioned as accomplices. Whatever the outcome, one thing is certain: these women bear part of the responsibility for some of the worst crimes in human history.